I was just a passenger on a commercial flight, but what happened next would change my life forever. The plane's black box audio was deleted by authorities, and I'm here to share my story. As I settled into my seat, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness, like many of us do when boarding a plane. The flight attendants welcomed us on board, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, his tone calm and reassuring. We taxied down the runway, and before I knew it, we were taking off into the sky. The flight experience was normal. The hum of the engines, the gentle sway of the plane, the murmur of conversations around me. But it all changed when we hit severe turbulence. The plane shuddered, and the oxygen masks dropped down from the ceiling. Panic started to set in as people around me screamed and cried. I felt a lump form in my throat as I gripped the armrests of my seat, my heart racing. The crew's communication systems failed, and we were plunged into an eerie silence. The flight attendants tried to reassure us that it was just a technical glitch, but as the minutes ticked by, the tension grew. Passengers started to whisper to each other, speculating about what was happening. Some thought it was a mechanical issue, while others believed it might be something more sinister, a possible security threat. I remember one passenger whispering to her friend, "What if it's not just a glitch? What if it's something worse?" The uncertainty was palpable, and I couldn't help but wonder what was going on. The crew tried to keep us calm, but their voices were laced with concern. They told us it was just a precaution, that we'd be landing safely soon. But as the plane continued to shake and rattle, it was hard to shake the feeling that something was off. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the turbulence stopped. The plane leveled out, and the oxygen masks retracted. The crew's voices came back over the intercom, reassuring us that we were safe. We breathed a collective sigh of relief as the plane began its descent, landing safely on the runway. But as we disembarked, something strange happened. The authorities boarded the plane, and they seemed to be in a hurry. They started collecting the black box, the device that records all critical flight data, including conversations between the crew. But as they did, something caught my eye. The data from the black box was being deleted. At first, I thought it was just a normal part of the investigation process, but as I watched the authorities work, I realized that something was off. They were erasing the data, erasing the evidence. I felt a chill run down my spine as I wondered what they were hiding. As I stepped off the plane, I was met with a mix of confusion and fear. What had happened on that flight? Why was the black box data being deleted? The questions swirled in my head as I walked away from the plane, feeling like I was leaving behind a piece of myself. Looking back, I realized that I was just a small part of a much larger story. A story that would take months, even years, to unravel. A story that would leave me with more questions than answers. But I'll get to that later. For now, I want to take you back to that moment, when I first realized that something was amiss. When I first wondered what was going on behind the scenes. As a passenger, I was just a faceless name on a flight manifest. But as I stood there, watching the authorities erase the evidence, I felt a sense of purpose. I knew that I had to share my story, to uncover the truth behind the deleted black box audio. And that's exactly what I'll be doing over the next few videos. I'll be taking you on a journey that will take us from the cockpit to the control tower, from the investigation room to the courtroom. A journey that will expose the truth behind the deleted black box audio and the secrets that it holds. But for now, let's take a closer look at the flight itself. What really happened during those turbulent moments? And what was the crew's communication like during the crisis? We'll explore these questions and more as we delve deeper into the mysterious black box audio. One thing's for sure, the more I learn, the more I realize that there's so much more to this story than I initially thought. And I'm excited to take you along for the ride. As we continue to explore the mystery of the deleted black box audio, I want to leave you with a question. What do you think happened on that flight? Do you think it was just a technical glitch, or was there something more sinister at play? Share your theories in the comments below, and let's get the conversation started. But before we move on to the next part of the story, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the passengers who were on that flight with me. We were all in this together, and I want to thank you for being part of this journey with me. Your experiences, your reactions, and your stories will be an integral part of this narrative, and I'm grateful to have you along for the ride. As we take a break from the story, I want to leave you with a thought. What would you do if you were in my shoes, if you were a passenger on that flight? Would you speak up, or would you keep quiet? Share your thoughts, and let's continue the conversation when we come back. And now, let's take a look at some of the evidence that we've uncovered so far. We've got some fascinating footage from the cockpit, as well as some insightful interviews with the crew members. Let's take a closer look and see if we can piece together what really happened during that fateful flight. As we continue to dig deeper, I want to ask you, what do you think the authorities are hiding? Are they trying to cover something up, or are they just trying to protect us from the truth? Share your theories, and let's keep the conversation going. And finally, before we wrap up this section, I want to leave you with a cliffhanger. What do you think the deleted black box audio might reveal? Will it confirm our worst fears, or will it expose a shocking truth? The wait is almost over. Stay tuned for the next part of the story, where we'll uncover the truth behind the deleted black box audio. As I delved deeper into the mystery, I began to realize that this was more than just a simple technical glitch. I'd been thinking about it nonstop since the flight, replaying every detail in my head like a movie. The sound of the plane's engines roaring to life, the hum of the air conditioning, the murmur of conversations from the other passengers, it was all still fresh in my memory. I started investigating the incident, speaking to fellow passengers and crew members who witnessed the events. At first, it seemed like everyone was just trying to piece together what had happened. But the more I learned, the more I realized that the deleted black box audio was a cover-up for something much bigger. I remember sitting down with one of the flight attendants, a woman named Sarah, who had been working the aisle where I was seated. She was quiet and reserved at first, but as we talked, she began to open up about what she'd seen. "It was like the plane just dropped suddenly," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was walking down the aisle when I felt this jolt, like we'd hit turbulence or something. But it wasn't turbulence, it was like the entire plane had just plummeted downwards." I pressed her for more details, asking her if she'd seen anything else unusual. She hesitated for a moment before speaking up. "There was a strange noise, like a low rumble. It was coming from the cockpit, but it sounded almost mechanical, like something was malfunctioning." I thanked Sarah for her time and continued my investigation, speaking to other passengers and crew members. But the more I learned, the more I realized that the deleted black box audio was a cover-up for something much bigger. It was like the authorities were trying to keep a secret, something that could potentially put the entire aviation industry in jeopardy. I encountered resistance from authorities, who seemed reluctant to share information, fueling my determination to uncover the truth. I filed FOIA requests, submitted Freedom of Information Act requests, and even reached out to my local representatives in Congress. But every door I tried to open seemed to lead to a dead end. It was frustrating, to say the least. I felt like I was being stonewalled, like the authorities were trying to silence me. But I refused to give up. I was determined to get to the bottom of this story, no matter what it took. As I dug deeper, I began to uncover some curious connections. It turned out that the plane's manufacturer had been involved in a series of high-profile lawsuits in the years leading up to this incident. And the pilot who flew the plane that day had a history of disciplinary actions against him. The more I learned, the more I realized that this was no ordinary technical glitch. This was a case of corporate negligence, of a company prioritizing profits over safety. And the deleted black box audio was just the tip of the iceberg. I knew I had to keep pushing, to keep digging until I uncovered the truth. And as I looked out the window, watching the sun set over the city, I knew that I was in this for the long haul. This was a story that wouldn't be easily forgotten, and I was determined to see it through to the end. I spent the next few days poring over documents and records, trying to piece together the events of that fateful flight. And what I found was shocking. It seemed that the pilot had been flying the plane in a way that was contrary to standard procedures, taking unnecessary risks, and pushing the limits of safety. But that wasn't the worst of it. I also discovered that the plane's manufacturer had been aware of the pilot's reckless behavior, yet had chosen to ignore it. They'd been more concerned with protecting their reputation and avoiding costly lawsuits than with ensuring the safety of their passengers. It was a stunning revelation, one that left me feeling both outraged and saddened. How could a company prioritize profits over people's lives? And what did it say about our system of accountability, where corporations were allowed to operate with impunity as long as they paid the right fines and paid the right lawyers? As I continued to research, I began to realize that this was just the tip of the iceberg. There were other incidents, other cover-ups, other cases of corporate negligence that had been swept under the rug. And I knew that I had to expose them all, to shine a light on the dark corners of our system and demand change. It was a daunting task, but I was ready for it. I was ready to take on the system, to challenge the status quo and demand accountability. And as I stood up, looking out at the city, I knew that I was in this for the long haul. This was a story that wouldn't be easily forgotten, and I was determined to see it through to the end. As I dug deeper into the mystery of the deleted black box audio, I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to this story than I initially thought. The authorities had been quick to dismiss it as a technical glitch, but I had a nagging sense that they were hiding something from us. And that's when I stumbled upon the first clue that made me realize just how big this conspiracy was. It started with a conversation with a fellow passenger who had been on the same flight as me. We were both curious about what had happened, and we exchanged numbers on the condition that we'd meet up to share more information. But when I reached out to him a few days later, he was evasive and kept changing the subject. It was then that I realized he must have been in the know about something, but he was too scared to talk. That's when I began to dig into the aviation industry, searching for any mention of similar incidents where black box audio had been deleted or tampered with. What I found was shocking. It wasn't an isolated incident. There were multiple cases of deleted audio files, all of which were attributed to technical glitches or human error. But I knew better. I knew that there was a pattern here, a pattern of cover-ups that went far beyond just a simple mistake. As I delved deeper into the world of aviation, I discovered a web of corruption and deceit that went all the way to the top. It seemed that government agencies and corporate interests had been working together to keep the truth from us, to silence anyone who dared to question what had really happened. I found documents and whistleblowers who corroborated my findings, and it was all starting to add up to a massive conspiracy. But the more I dug, the more I realized that I was in over my head. I started receiving threatening messages from unknown sources, warning me to drop the investigation. They seemed to know everything about me, and it was clear that they were watching my every move. I began to feel like I was being stalked, and the fear was starting to get to me. Despite the threats, I couldn't bring myself to give up. I felt a responsibility to uncover the truth, to expose the cover-up and bring those responsible to justice. And so, I continued to dig, using every resource at my disposal to get to the bottom of this story. As I sat in front of my computer, sifting through documents and emails, I couldn't help but wonder what I had stumbled upon. What did the authorities have to hide, and why were they so eager to keep the truth from us? The more I learned, the more I realized that this was just the tip of the iceberg. There was so much more to this story, and I was determined to find out what it was. The stakes were high, but I was more determined than ever to see this through. I knew that I was taking a risk, but I also knew that I had to do what was right. And so, I kept pushing forward, even as the threats and intimidation continued to escalate. It's funny how life can change in an instant. One minute you're a passenger on a commercial flight, and the next you're caught up in a massive conspiracy. But that's exactly what happened to me. And as I look back on it all, I realize that I'm not just fighting for the truth, I'm fighting for my life. As I continue to investigate, I'm reminded of the words of a whistleblower who came forward to me a few weeks ago. "The truth is like a virus," they said. "Once it's out, it can't be contained. And those who try to stop it will be exposed for what they are." I couldn't agree more. And so, I press on, fueled by my determination to expose the truth and bring those responsible to justice. It's a daunting task, but I know that I'm not alone. There are others out there who are fighting for the same thing, the truth. As I close this chapter of my investigation, I'm left with more questions than answers. What other secrets are hidden in the black box audio? What other cover-ups are waiting to be exposed? And what will happen to me when I finally uncover the truth? Only time will tell. But one thing is for sure, I won't stop until I've gotten to the bottom of this story. The truth is out there, and I'm going to find it, no matter what it takes. I met a brave whistleblower who came forward with shocking information about the aviation industry's dark secrets. It was a turning point in my investigation, and it's a moment that I'll never forget. As I sat down with this whistleblower, I could feel the weight of the information they were about to share. They revealed that the deleted black box audio was just one of many incidents where safety protocols were compromised for corporate gain. It was a staggering admission, and one that made me wonder how far-reaching the corruption went. The whistleblower told me about a culture of intimidation and fear that pervaded the industry, where safety concerns were often swept under the rug in favor of profit. I was stunned by the whistleblower's revelations, which exposed a culture of corruption and intimidation within the industry. It was like a veil had been lifted, and I was finally seeing the truth for what it was. The whistleblower spoke about the pressure to meet deadlines, the push to cut costs, and the blatant disregard for safety protocols. It was a pattern that seemed to repeat itself time and time again, with devastating consequences. As I listened to the whistleblower's story, I couldn't help but think about the passengers who had been on that flight. What had they been thinking as the plane soared through the skies, unaware of the danger that lurked beneath the surface? Had they suspected anything was amiss, or had they trusted the authorities to keep them safe? The questions swirled in my mind, and I knew I had to keep pushing forward with the investigation. The whistleblower's bravery inspired me to continue the investigation, despite the risks. I knew that I was taking a chance by pursuing this story, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too important to ignore. There were too many questions left unanswered, too many lives affected by the industry's dark secrets. As I left the meeting with the whistleblower, I felt a sense of determination wash over me. I knew that I had to keep digging, to keep pushing for the truth. And I knew that I wasn't alone. There were others out there who were fighting for the same cause. Together, we could make a difference and bring about change. But I also knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be obstacles to overcome, challenges to face, and secrets to uncover. And I was about to stumble upon one of the biggest secrets of all, a secret that would change everything I thought I knew about the aviation industry. As I continued to expose the truth about the deleted black box audio, the government began to take notice, and I found myself in a desperate fight for survival. I was no longer just a curious journalist, but a threat to the establishment. At first, it was just a whisper in the wind, a rumor about a government agent who was watching my every move. But then, the knock came on my door. I opened it to find a middle-aged man in a suit, his eyes cold and calculating. He introduced himself as Agent Thompson, and I knew immediately that I was in trouble. He told me that I was getting too close to the truth, that my investigation was a threat to national security. My initial instinct was to back down, to shut down the investigation and let the government have its secrets. But something about Agent Thompson's words stuck with me. It wasn't just the threat of consequences, but the implication that I was playing with fire. I knew that I had stumbled upon something big, something that could change the course of history. So, I refused to back down. I told Agent Thompson that I wasn't afraid of him, that I was determined to uncover the truth no matter what. And to my surprise, he didn't back down either. He leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're making a big mistake," he said. "You're playing with forces beyond your control." I felt a shiver run down my spine as he spoke, but I didn't back down. Instead, I pressed him for answers, demanding to know what secrets the government was hiding. Agent Thompson just shook his head, a mixture of pity and contempt on his face. "You don't want to know," he said. "Trust me, you don't want to know." But I knew that I had to know. I had to push forward no matter the cost. And so, I continued to dig deeper, to follow the trail of clues and leads that would take me to the very heart of the government's secrets. I knew that I was taking a risk, but I was willing to bet my life on the truth. As I looked back on that moment, I realized that the government's response had only added to the mystery. They were hiding something, but what? And why were they so desperate to keep it under wraps? I knew that I was getting close to the truth, but I had no idea just how close. The government's silence was deafening, a heavy weight that pressed down on me with every passing day. But I refused to be silenced. I kept pushing forward, driven by a burning desire to uncover the truth. And as I did, I began to uncover a web of deceit and corruption that went all the way to the top. But that's a story for another day. For now, I'll just say that the government's response was the catalyst that set me on a journey of discovery, a journey that would take me to the very limits of my courage and my conviction. I'll never forget the moment when everything changed. As I dug deeper into the deleted black box audio, I stumbled upon a shocking twist that made my blood run cold. In a shocking twist, I discovered that the government was not the only one involved in the cover-up. It turned out that a powerful corporation, with deep roots in the aviation industry, was secretly manipulating the investigation from behind the scenes. At first, I struggled to wrap my head around the scale of corruption that I was uncovering. But as I dug deeper, I began to see a web of deceit that reached the highest echelons of the industry and government agencies. The more I learned, the more I realized that this was no ordinary conspiracy. It was a carefully orchestrated cover-up that put lives at risk for corporate gain. I remember the night I received a cryptic message from a trusted source, hinting at the true extent of the corruption. The message read, "Follow the money, and you'll find the truth." It was a simple phrase, but it was enough to send me down a rabbit hole of investigation and discovery. I spent countless hours poring over financial records, interviewing whistleblowers, and tracking down leads. And then it happened. The truth finally emerged, exposing a massive conspiracy that shook the very foundations of the aviation industry. The revelations were explosive, sparking outrage and demands for accountability from the public. But as the news broke, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much more to uncover. The government was forced to launch a new investigation, but as I watched the proceedings unfold, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The true extent of the cover-up remained unclear, and I knew that I had only scratched the surface of a much larger story. The questions swirled in my mind. Who else was involved? How deep did the corruption go? And what would be the ultimate cost of this conspiracy? As I looked back on the journey that had brought me to this point, I knew that I had only just begun to unravel the threads of a sinister plot that had been hiding in plain sight. The truth was finally out, but I knew that there was still so much more to discover. And I was determined to keep digging, no matter the cost. The silence that followed was deafening. The world was reeling from the revelations, but I knew that I had only just begun to scratch the surface of a much larger story. The questions lingered, and I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the shadows. The truth had finally emerged, but I knew that the real story was still waiting to be told. The aftermath, as I look back on the investigation that started with a mysterious black box audio, I'm still trying to process the impact it had on my life and the world around me. The conclusion was shattering. The truth revealed that the government was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. But what happened next was a testament to the power of transparency and accountability. The fallout from the investigation was swift and seismic. The aviation industry was forced to confront the dark secrets they had been hiding for so long, and it led to significant changes in regulation and oversight. Government agencies were held accountable for their role in the cover-up, and some officials were even brought to justice. It was a victory, but it was also a reminder that there was still so much work to be done. For me, the experience was a catalyst for positive change. I had been driven by a desire to uncover the truth, but I had also been pushed to the edge of what seemed possible. I realized that even in the face of overwhelming opposition, I could still make a difference. And so, I continued to fight for transparency and accountability, using the experience as a reminder that the truth will always be revealed, no matter how hard people try to hide it. The story of the deleted black box audio served as a reminder that the truth is like a puzzle. It may be hidden, but it will always be revealed, and justice will always be served. It's a message that I hope resonates with all of you, and it's one that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. The investigation that started with a mysterious black box audio ended with a shocking revelation that shook the nation. But it's not just about the revelation, it's about what comes next. As I look out at the world today, I see a different landscape. I see a world where people are more aware of the power of transparency and accountability. I see a world where the truth is more accessible, and where those in power are held accountable for their actions. It's a world that's not perfect, but it's a world that's moving in the right direction. And I'm proud to have played a small part in that journey. I'm proud to have been a voice for those who were silenced, and to have helped bring the truth to light. The aftermath of the investigation was nothing short of remarkable, and it's a testament to the power of courage and determination.